I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Dadi because a lot of us became puppeteers by watching some of the material he introduced on stage. Suddenly you would have umbrellas which would turn into circus creatures, and I think we were all in school, and I remember going to the Shriram basement watching these creatures thinking, my God, this is inside my head. How could it be outside? So for a child's world, it really, something explodes. But having said that, I think when we started seriously thinking about puppetry as a career, a few of us together in 1998, and the puppetry scene was 2.5 companies in Delhi, and I think a few in West Bengal. And contemporary puppetry was a very watered down version of stuff copied from Philippe Jonty in Europe, or some spectacular puppet company, but nobody had those materials, and people were doing some things. And the question of originality was, what is this Indian contemporary language for puppetry? There was already a strong contemporary theatre language in India, but what would it be for dead material? So the essential difference between theatre and puppetry is that our actors are technically dead, or made of dead material. So the audience is having to believe that this thing is alive for the moment. I mean, in a play, if you have a terrible actor, that actor is still alive. But in our case, it's a fine line. If the puppet is moving too much, it's dead. If it's not moving at all, it's dead. So you're constantly keeping this balance where people believe it's breathing, it's looking, it's simulating life. Now the thing is, we have a strong Indian traditional puppet history. We have 23 living traditional forms. Kathputli is only one of them. So where does the contemporariness come in? Do you copy what is traditional? Do you completely break away and just look westwards and copy something there? I think the biggest challenge became, what is this new language going to be? And I think Dadi did that a lot in a certain era where he was constantly challenging himself with what is this new language, especially in the design of the puppet. I think we started looking at what is this relationship between the puppet and the puppeteer, because there are always two entities on stage. And most times, even though you're present behind a tiny puppet, our training is that we would disappear. Like an actor's training is, sometimes I watch a play by a fabulous actor, and on stage that actor looks 8 feet tall. And then you see them backstage and they're actually, 4 foot nothing. And you're wondering, how did this person look so tall on stage? That's the essential training, they just expand. Our training is to disappear behind a puppet, whether it's big or small. But how do you reappear? How do you talk about this relationship of power? Who's in power? Is it the puppet controlling the puppeteer? Is it the puppeteer controlling the puppet? And I think that for us in the last 15 years has been the big question, because it also helps you tackle many questions of life. Who is manipulated by whom? Questions of politics, questions of culture. And the puppet has a license, because it's dead material. It can say a lot of things which, as an actor or a performer, you can't go and say on stage. The puppet gets away with it by saying rude things, by saying otherwise not permissive things. So that's been a big question for us. I think the root of all, we're telling stories as performing artists, but in puppetry, the same script gets readapted. We have to ask ourselves the question, why a puppet? Why shouldn't an actor do this? Why should we bring dead material into this? So I think even looking at very universal narratives like the Mahabharata, there are already fantastic actor-performed Mahabharata performances. When we adapted it, we had to look at, why does the puppet come in? What is this, where is this actor-puppeteer relationship coming in? Where is the dead material coming in? Where is the mask coming in? So I think with the script of a puppet theatre, we are always redevising it to adapt it for the medium to be present on stage. So Durga, which was an extract from Pother Panchali, I played only the first bit with little tabletop puppets, and there were 9 puppets and 1 storyteller who's Opu. And there, that little universe comes out of a trunk. And the beauty of puppet is, human actors, the size is pretty predetermined. We are on an average between 4 to 7 feet, let's say. But a puppet can be 10 inches. And what happens when you shrink the whole universe? Suddenly, it's possible to contain Vibhuti Bhushan or Satyajit Ray in a tiny trunk. And then your audience is watching everything in a focused way. These days I find when I play small puppets for children, they're so used to it because their entire life is an iPad. They have no problem switching to a tiny puppet show. But how can I reclaim that space of television and digital and give them something live instead? So those are advantages that I think the plastic art form has of shrinking the space, expanding the space. I mean, these giant puppets have often walked into rooms like this and people are like, oh my God, the dimension of the room changes. You're almost in this Alice in Wonderland space where you feel smaller than everything else. So I think that is special to this medium. Of course, it has its limitations. If I have a lot of words, or if I have something which depends on the actor's face only, then the puppet is not the solution. Because of course an actor is going to do it better and is going to be much more interesting. If I'm talking a lot, nobody's going to look at my little puppet. They're going to look at my face. The human face is always more interesting than the actor. So I have to find reasons to keep a non-living object on stage.
You know, the funny thing, Anurupa talked about the importance of the actor. In many ways, you've been pioneering that, but with kids. And with kids who have come up with exceptional performances. And when you act as a child or as a young person, your worldview changes. Tell us a little bit about why is it so important in today's day and age to ensure that you have theatre in schools, and why is it important for kids to experience a theatrical world?
Sanjoy?
It's working.
How did you know that this is what I wanted to talk about? This is precisely what I did want to talk about, that we have such excellent theatre people who are good, excellent playwrights, directors, actors, lights, costumes, everything. But what we lack in our audiences. And now with the digital and with the laptop and with the television programs, we are losing out on that audience. So it is very important to introduce theatre in schools and have play competitions like the way you have Meta for adults. If we have shows prepared with inter-college competitions and with student audiences, then we get that audience which is used to seeing a play. They don't have to come to the theatre can be brought to them. Because for them to be transported to a theatre is very difficult. But for them to take, because this is what I did. I used the children and took them to the venues, to the Anath Ashram, to the various children's organizations, the Bal Bhavan and everywhere. I took my plays there because that way I could do 3 or 4 performances without the students have to going anywhere. My actors and our team went there and performed, and that was our audience, to build audiences to see plays, to be participating in theatre, to keep it alive, not only for the stage performances and theatre to move forward, but for audiences to want to go to see a play. And the whole thing should be built around schools where the entire, it's a subject, just like any other subject where you get graded and for which you are, all your rehearsals, all your auditions, all the activity remains within school hours. Time has to be given to them and you have to be graded on them, and you have to have little repertories which do plays with the senior students or with classes which don't have to do board exams, or once they get used to it, then for them it's, within about 4 to 5 rehearsals you can keep repeating the play for audiences and take those plays in that area to other schools, which is what we did. And that's the biggest thing that we lack. That way it becomes part of the curriculum, you get graded on it, and theatre moves forward.
Sushma ji is box. सबका जो फोकस रहा है ना कि इनोवेशन कहाँ से आएगी. आफ्टर ऑल टुडे एवरीथिंग इज गोइंग टुवर्ड्स अ सर्विस built industry. वहाँ पे innovation is very important. If you're in theatre or if you're part of the arts, that's the first thing you're able to look at, how to innovate.
Everyone is very ingenious and very gifted. They do have their own perspectives, they have their own talents, they have their own nuances, and they know how to project a certain character. The same character can be played with very many people in different manners, with subtlety. And within the framework, you can innovate, but you don't go beyond that.
Deepan, I'm going to ask you, Anurupa talked about how can you shrink a whole performance and put it into a box. In many ways, stage design and the way that you reinvented design is, as he said, a character, or in this case, many characters. Tell us again how you found that and what was your experience, because you also had the ability to be able to rehearse in places like Kerala with large spaces where you could create these more community-based shows.
Well, I see theatre as a form that is very hybrid form, which is in a way an amalgamation of various artistic expressions. And design of the space we speak is one element, right? There is literature, there's a sound of music, there is certainly a lot of acting, and the experience what you have, the live experience what you have is it because of this collaboration of these various kind of artistic minds coming together. Conventionally, what I said conventionally, there is an understanding, or at least there is a perspective that theatre is something that you have a text and you have a story to tell, and that is primarily done through actors. And the design is something that you create a space to support the actors to present the story. But when we speak about puppetry, for example, we don't necessarily speak about puppetry as a device to tell the story. It's rather puppetry itself is the form of art. And that could be the case for any form of theatre. Like Anirbaan was saying, the sound is not just that you put in a cherry on top of a cake after you're making it, but it's also very much part of the experience of the theatre itself. Similarly, for me, theatre is a form that you experience in the space. And the space is for me, is scenography. This space is not a space which is created in order to tell the story, but the space itself is the story. And so a large space or small space doesn't really matter. That's all depends on what kind of theatre you do. It can happen on a table with one actor and a box. That itself is enough maybe to tell something. But sometimes we need a large lake to do that. So it all depends on how do you deal with that material. And I think as long as you have a freedom and imagination to go up to that scale or come down to a small scale, which all depends on what that material require.
In many ways,
कहाँ से एक्टर आएगा, कहाँ करेक्टर जाएगा. एंड टेलीविजन आपके पास या सिनेमा में आपके पास एक पूरी छूट है कि आप कहीं भी जा सकते हैं. You can go to jungle, you can go to park, you can go to a school, you can go to, आपके पास वो है, वो छूट है. और कई बार यानी कि कुछ चीज़ें डिक्टेट करती हैं कि कई बार होता प्रोड्यूसर ही कहता है कि भाई बजट ज़्यादा नहीं तो थोड़ा सा ऐसा बनाना. लेकिन हाँ होता है कि सीन्स आपके स्मॉल हो जाते हैं. यू कैन क्रिएट स्मॉल सीन्स. आपका एक 10 सेकंड का भी एक सीन हो सकता है विच इज नॉट पॉसिबल ऑन स्टेज. मुझे लगता है कि स्टेज में आपको थोड़ा सा एक लंबा सीन आपको क्रिएट करना पड़ता है. देन ऑल्सो यू थिंक इन टर्म्स ऑफ सीन एक्ट और जो पूरा उसका वो अलग वो है. लेकिन जो कुछ बेसिक चीज़ें होती हैं कि इसमें तीसरी चीज़ जैसे कि ये हम लोग कर रहे थे बाण भट्ट की आत्मकथा, हजारी प्रसाद द्विवेदी का नॉवेल है और उसमें जब मैं उसको ड्रामेटाइज कर रहा था तो आई रियलाइज कि जो बाण भट्ट का करेक्टर है, सडनली ही बिकम समथिंग एल्स। अब वो एक्टर के पास टाइम नहीं है कि वो कॉस्ट्यूम चेंज करके, अपना गेटअप चेंज करके 1 मिनट में दोबारा आ सकता है। तो हमने डिवाइस की कि हम विल हैव 2 बाण भट्ट। अब जब 2 बाण भट्ट आए तो ठीक हुआ, एक उसका जो है उसका अंतर्मन है, उसका एक जो चल रहा है, एक उसका एक्सटर्नल सेल्फ है। तो इस तरीके से फिर वो चीजें उसके अंदर आनी शुरू हुई जो कि नॉवेल में नहीं है। बट यानी कि आप स्टेज पे सब क्रिएट कर सकते हैं। दिस यू कैन नॉट डू ऑन इन टेलीविजन और सिनेमा। स्टेज आपको एक पॉसिबिलिटीज देता है कि आप एक ही कैरेक्टर को आप 2 एक्टर्स के साथ परफॉर्म कर रहे हैं और ऑडियंस विल एक्सेप्ट दैट। तो यानी कि दोनों के अपने अपने जो खासियत।
टेलीविजन में भी ये भी है कि आपका जो हुक है, यू हैव टू हैव अ हुक बिफोर द इंटरवल, आफ्टर द इंटरवल, बिफोर द नेक्स्ट एपिसोड। एडवर्टाइजिंग के हिसाब से आपको करना पड़ता है।
आपको एपिसोड ऐसे एंड करना है कि वहां पे हुक हो, जो कि हमें थिएटर में नहीं चाहिए होता है।
तो हाउ डू यू गो व्हेन यू आर राइटिंग, हाउ डू यू मूव फ्रॉम वन टू द अदर? यू मेक इट, इज इट कॉन्शियस या
यू हैव टू बी वेरी कॉन्शियस? वैसे मैंने बहुत सालों से अब टेलीविजन पे लिखा नहीं है। रिसेंटली आई रोट ए फिल्म, यानी कि स्टार्टेड एज ए वेब सीरीज, then became a film for some OTT platform। तो वो भी एक, लेकिन वो ज़्यादातर यानी कि वो टेलीविजन से शुरुआत हो करके फिल्म में कन्वर्ट हो गया। तो दैट वी हैव टू रीथिंक द होल थिंग कि कैसे हम इसको पूरे को। इससे मुझे एक याद आया, अगर मैं शेयर कर सकूँ एक किस्सा। आई वॉज वर्किंग विद मनोहर श्याम जोशी। इनफैक्ट वर्किंग क्या, मनोहर श्याम जोशी एक ज़माने में दूरदर्शन ने अपने प्रोजेक्ट खोले थे, तो बहुत सारे लोग लिख पा रहे थे। जोशी जी के पास टाइम नहीं था, वो इतना लिख रहे थे। तो ही कॉल्ड मी कि क्या कर रहे हैं? मैंने कहा मैं कुछ नहीं। अरे यार, सब लोग इतने सीरियल लिख रहे, तुम खाली बैठे हुए, आओ आओ, मेरे पास एक स्क्रिप्ट है, इसको जो है मैंने लिखा था रमेश सिप्पी के लिए एज ए फिल्म, तो अभी इसको सीरियल में कन्वर्ट करना है। तो मैंने कहा अच्छा मैं ट्राई करता हूँ। मैंने तो कभी ये किया नहीं कि फिल्म की स्क्रिप्ट को, बोले कुछ नहीं करना यार, इसको एक तो थोड़ा सा साहित्यिक बना दो। मैंने क्या कहता, टेलीविजन थोड़ा साहित्यिक है, सिनेमा बिल्कुल साहित्यिक नहीं। दीज वर हिज वर्ड। बोले इसको साहित्यिक बना दो थोड़ा सा, और इसका स्केल टोन डाउन कर दो। उसमें हेलीकॉप्टर आ रहा है, प्लेन आ रहा है, ये सब तो भाई टेलीविजन का बजट इतना नहीं होता है, तो
नहीं होता था।
हाँ था, अब तो इसमें जो वेब OTT प्लेटफॉर्म में तो हो गया। उस जमाने में तो बोले इसको स्केल डाउन कर दो, इसको थोड़ा साहित्यिक कर दो, और थोड़ा इसको एपिसोड्स में कन्वर्ट कर दो। और वो किया मैंने, वो अप्रूव भी हो गया था, बन नहीं पाया वो अलग बात है। तो
इनफैक्ट द फनीस्ट इज इफ यू वेंट टू मनोहर श्याम जोशी, अरे वो ट्रंक तो खोलो ना, उसमें देख लो पड़ा हुआ है, मैंने ऐसी कोई चीज नहीं है जो मैंने लिखा नहीं है। Quite amazing. Sushma, I'm going to end with you. You know, Abiva is saying the difference between writing for television and film. What's the difference between acting on stage and acting as you've done on both film and television? Are each of them sort of different?
Yes, certainly very different, because on stage gestures are larger, the personality that you're playing is much bigger and more outward, and you have to perform the slightest nuance of an emotion so that the audience and the person sitting in the last row can feel it and see it. So it's much larger. All the hand movements and the stance and the larger movements have to be very definite. And this was a change that for the first film that I did was for Sham Benegal Junoon, and I said the first day, don't shoot with me, I want to observe. I've never watched a shoot before and I don't know how it's done, and I want to watch. So I stood there and I thought that yes, everybody is underplaying whatever the scenes have been given to me, and I realized that not only the hand movements and the postures and the movements within the frame were smaller and less, but what you felt is what was being communicated, and not so much as what you tried to show. So there was no trying to show that emotion, but feeling it and under feeling it, for the eyes to reflect, for the slight little change in your face, your hand movement, or the body, the posture, whatever that is. For television, it's a little more, it depends on the position of the camera also. Because this is what happened to me. I was in Junoon, there's a scene where Benjamin Gilani, who plays my son, is killed in the war. And they're bringing his body. And there was a scene that I was supposed to see it and just cry in that whole scene. And loud crying and big crying, not just emotionally underplaying, but बहुत जोर जोर से रोना था, फूट के रोना था. So I thought कि अब पता नहीं आंसू आएंगे या नहीं आएंगे. So सवेरे से I talked to nobody. I sat there, ना खाया ना पिया. I said ये तो mood बनाना पड़ेगा कि उस वक्त रोना आ जाए. For goodness sake, stage पे तो you know when you're working, somehow in that scene the build up, you feel that emotion and it works. But इस पे तो camera switch on करेंगे and I'm supposed to bring tears. How will that happen? सवेरे से ना खाया ना पिया ना बोला ना चला कुछ भी नहीं. Finally they said all right, अब इधर आ जाइएगा, वो वहाँ से लाएंगे उसको पलंग उस पे चारपाई पे और आपको देखकर और वो जैसे रखेंगे आपको फूट फूट के रोना है. I said all right. I stood behind the pillar. I said, "Chalo, all right, all right." No, I thought of the worst things possible that could happen to me. And I went there and the shot was perfect. I wailed and cried, tears came. They said, final, wonderful shot, subject, तालियां बजाएंगे. I said, thank God, आंसू भी आ गए. तो कैमरा था वहाँ. फिर भी वो यहाँ ले आया, उन्होंने कहा वही भी रिपीट करिए. I said, वो आंसू तो सारे खत्म, अब कहाँ से आएंगे? तो उन्होंने कहा use glycerin. That was my first experience of how to be moved on screen and on stage and television.